And welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Peter Winnick. I'm the founder and CEO of Thought Leadership Leverage. And you're joining us on the podcast today, which is Leveraging Thought Leadership. Today, my guest is Alan Adamson. Alan's a branding expert, a Forbes columnist, and he's the author of three books, the latest being Shift Ahead, as well as the co-founder of a company called Metaforce. As I was getting ready for today's show, I realized Alan's a fairly interesting guy that meets a lot of, or checks a lot of the boxes that we're always looking for in terms of he's a commentator, he's an author, he's running a business, does a lot of speaking, advising, etc. So it'd be interesting to hear his story today. So welcome aboard, Alan. Thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for inviting me, Peter. A pleasure to be here.
Great. So you've got your latest book, which was called Shift Ahead: How the Best Companies Stay Relevant in a Fast-Changing World. Recently came out by Amicom. So let's start there with through the standpoint of, so you decided to write yet another book, and then underneath that there's a series of questions. So the first would be why, and then how did you go about choosing Amicom as a publisher this time?
Well, the why was that lots of folks were coming at that point. I was running a chunk of Landor, and lots of companies and brands were coming to us and saying, "Can you help us with our marketing?" And we realized for many of them, just better advertising or marketing tactics were not going to help. They had become their father's Oldsmobile. They were no longer relevant. And so I wanted to zoom out and say, why are more and more companies and organizations struggling to stay relevant? And the obvious answer is that the world is spinning a little faster, change is happening faster. But it pivoted me to dig into it. Why do so many people know the world is changing faster yet are unable to change?
Got it. So that's the message, right? And then I guess my question is around, there's lots of ways to get that message out there. You can get it out through Keynote, you can get it out through your articles on Forbes. Why did you decide now is the time to write a book? Because that's as you know, a fairly monumental undertaking.
Yeah, it's a large mountain to climb, but often if you can step out of the day-to-day frenzy of what life is in most of our worlds, writing a book puts you in a different time frame. And I actually partnered with a professor at NYU, Joel, who also was in a different bubble than mine, had the ability to translate sort of here's what's going on into something called what he calls a teachable moment. So that's sort of interesting, but what do you want me to take away from that? And so part of it was the desire every couple years, I think, for me to step out of the frenzy and try to zoom out
Okay.
and go back to school. And so writing a book to me was going back to school because you call up a lot of people, you do a lot of research,
Yep.
and you do a lot of listening. Whereas in business, you do perhaps less listening and more talking.
Got it. And you're learning along the way, right? Obviously.
Right, exactly. I mean, if I called you up and said, "Tell me about X, Y, and Z," or "Let me tell you about me," I can hear the dial tone now when you hang up on me. So part of it is most people are interested in talking about their business, their learnings, their experience, and if you're writing a book, you tend to get more of their attention and time. It's not 5 minutes; it's usually an hour, and you get more insights. You dig beyond the obvious.
Now, how long ago was it that you first published your first book? When did that come out?
Probably 15 years ago. It's called Brand Simple.
Yep.
It's still something I still use today because
Sure.
the best brands need to stay simple in a world where people only have 8 seconds to hear about you.
So give me a sense of, from your perspective as an author, and I'm looking at this more from the messaging and marketing of the book, which is a bit of a meta conversation for the co-founder of Metaforce, right? So what's changed? 15 years ago, you wrote your first book, so you're a little bit green, versus now, been down this path before. In order to just get that message out there, get the book in the right hands of the right people to take the actions that you'd like them to.
It's exponentially more difficult, as you know, because everyone can be an author today.
Yep.
There's more content being created every minute than there was for the last 100 years. And so even in the publishing world, when I did my first book, the publisher at that time, Macmillan, had a fair amount of marketing support to offer in
Sure.
terms of how they helped. Landor had some money to put into it. We did some advertising. But in today's world, publishers can barely often just get some distribution. And the notion of them actually helping you tell your story is something they would love to do, but they have to reserve for their next Harry Potter book.
So therefore, the burden's on you, the poor author,
Right.
to also be the CMO of Book Inc.
Right, you gotta mark yeah, writing it is half the battle, but if you build it, don't assume people will come. It's sort
Yep.
of like putting up a web page today, everyone's very, "Oh, I gotta get a new web page up," and, web page is like it's like getting your phone number in the old phone book. Alright, so your phone number's so there are a million other phone numbers, now what?
So let's go brass tacks here. So, writing the book is half the battle, and I'm not, diluting the
Or
or
even less.
being, yeah, exactly. So, what are the things you're a marketer? So this is probably more in your sweet spot than it is for most. Let's say I'm writing a book. My domain expertise is leadership or management or whatever, and I might not have that sort of marketing gene. What are the things that I should be thinking about specifically to market my book better? And by book I mean the actual physical book we want sales, but the message and everything that's underneath it.
Yeah, I think 2 things here. Obviously, 1, it helps if you have a simple sticky title that people will remember. If
Okay.
you just said management for for new managers, it's not going to be as sticky as management for dummies.
Right,
Um,
right.
so
So
obviously,
put for dummies at the end of anything is always good, right?
exactly, it will probably help sell anything. Um, but that matters because you only have a chance to get people to hear it, maybe read it once, and if they can't really remember it, you have no time to tell them the second time. The other is to realize that writing the book is the beginning, not the end. Most people think when they
Yep.
hit the last send, they're done, but that's when you really got to start creating content. You got to get out and do talks.
Yep.
You got to create more content around it to help create enough gravitational pull to pull people in. And the world we're in right now, I do lots of podcasts, but unlike doing one network television thing before, where you might reach 100,000 people at a click, now you've got to do 200 people at a click, 500 people at a click, 1,000 people. So it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Got it. So let's pivot a little bit and talk about sort of as you're writing this book, there's a learning component of this for you, and then you've got to get the message out to teach others. What is the underlying business or businesses under Shift Ahead, right? So, the crass way we might be putting that is, how do I pay you for Shift Ahead? I can buy a book for $25. What are the other business models underneath it?
Well, the other one is, of course, that if people are intrigued with your analysis as to why they're struggling to keep their business relevant, they might read the book, they might skim the book, they might read an article you've written about the book, and one day they might call and say, hey, "Look, I read the story you did on BlackBerry or whatever it was, and we have a similar problem. Can you come up and talk to us?" So that's sort of the business model for me behind the book. If I were living off book sales, I couldn't ship used books to my son's university to cover tuition.
Yeah, right,
So
right. You acquire a taste for ramen at that point. But
exactly.
let's push that further, right? So we know that for very, very few authors, like literally you can probably count them on a hand or two, that actually make a living directly from either the advance or the book sales or whatever. The underlying business model needs to be the quote other bucket, be that speaking, be that advising, be that consulting, etc. So other than waiting for a subset of the folks that get exposed to the book or the work through Forbes or something like that, what are the things that you can do to sort of accelerate that, to get the book in the right hands of the right people?
Yeah, that's the other piece. Just of course, just sending an email saying, "Do you want to read the book?" or sending it even copies of the book. First of all, physical books, the boxes don't even get opened half the time. So partly it's then looking to see where your topic is relevant and how do you get out there. So for me, every week there's a headline in the newspaper that is a flag saying, "Hey, I got the same problem." Sears restructuring,
Yep.
Kraft Heinz taking up $15 billion, write down Uber losing money. Anytime there is a headline of a well-known company that is not uh, heading in the right direction or is having trouble shifting to the next chapter, I then look to them and say, "Hey, let me reach out to them. Let me send them an article. Because as you know, when in a world of too much information, you only deal with mission critical stuff right away. So if your business is crashing, then you're interested in finding out how not to crash it.
Okay, so there's a huge universe of people that may enjoy your book, right? But then you read something, in the newspaper or whatever, and you say, aha, based on X, whatever the story du jour is, that executive at that company right now, I'm a lot more relevant to. Let me get something in their hands, and it doesn't whether.
Right, and I probably won't send in the book. I might do a quick column. I might do a quick blog on it to talk about, hey, why are Beats headphones struggling, and what's my take on it. And out of every five of those, maybe one or two might ping me and say, hey, can you come and talk to our team about what you found out?
So that's pretty effective. So first they're sending you in, you're sending them an email, but obviously you have the credentials underneath that, right? You're not
Right.
some
Y-
Nigerian
Yeah.
prince, right? So then they
But
go
the
and they.
old days of just sending people books, or people assuming people would, browse in a bookstore and see your book and go, oh, that's what I mean, pull it down. Forget it. Those days ended 10 years ago.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what's a bookstore? That's where I go to
Right,
get
exactly.
candles now, right?
Or
Yeah,
do people browse? When my kids go into a bookstore, their nose is in their phone,
yeah,
even
exactly.
if I drag them into a bookstore to get something for me.
Right, which is probably why they're there. Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, one
exactly.
thing I will say, Alan, is we've done, I think, I don't know what the number is, 120, 140 episodes on the podcast. And there have been only two people. You're the second to actually send me your book hard copy in advance. And I'm an avid reader,
Right.
and it does stand out because here it is sitting on my desk. But, there is something about the tactile, about the tangible.
Yeah, yeah, I'm old school, so to some extent I could say, look, I've written 20 blogs and here's a thumb drive and no one's going to open that. But if I can drop the book and have a thud on the conference room table, the sound branding sometimes helps.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that matters. And even you could have sent me a link. I actually read 90% of or more on my Kindle these days.
Right.
A book does stand out. How do you determine whether, sort of what is a good use of your time from a thought leadership perspective? So, for example, you write for Forbes, you do all these other things. There's an intrinsic, like, hey, I want to write this article because I want to learn about the cloud or whatever. But how do you sort of measure the ROI on some of the things that you do? And I'm not talking about on a
Yeah,
pro
I
article
really
basis.
wish I had the holy grail on that, Peter, to share. I can be really excited about something and write a Forbes column or a column for
Yep.
Brand Week or another publication, and 14 cousins and their uncle, read it. And sometimes I'll write something and say, who's interested in this? And all of a sudden I get, lots of eyeballs. So predicting what will take off, I feel for the people in the movie business because, as
Yep.
you put the same stars with the same script writer and the same director, and you end up eating all the popcorn yourself, and you sometimes do something totally off the wall.
Okay, but I agree with that. That we are the worst judge of, you write something. Oh, this is the one that's going to blow up, and then you put something else out there and say, I'm almost embarrassed to put my name on it, and that does blow up. So I think what that forces you to do is to say, listen, I've got to consistently put stuff out there. More importantly, I have to have my antenna tuned in to see the response and do that in a way that's, divorced from your ego, if you will.
Right. And the other piece is to the simple old, which is something that is easier said than done, is one of the things we actually learn from the book is that often leaders who sit behind their desks and just read don't do as well as people that are out walking the walk and talking to customers and going to stores and hanging out. And so, part of it is to come up with even ideas to talk about. By the time you read something and it's already gone viral, it's almost over. It's the end of the wave. And so part of success is getting out of our bubble and getting out and just seeing with fresh eyes, if you can, like a tourist. Even if you've been in the city 10 times, try to look at the city through the tourist eyes.
Sure. But you mentioned a point there that you sort of brushed through that lots of folks read a lot but don't do much, right? And one of the things I thought was interesting about your book, given that there's two of you that wrote it, you and Joel Steckel, is you have the classically stereotypical, the theoretical and the applied,
Right.
right? You've partnered with an academic,
Yeah.
which is awesome, but oftentimes the pushback that the business community gives to an academic is, oh, but you're in your ivory tower, et cetera, and then the academic world pushes back to the classic consultant says, oh, but that doesn't validate academically. You've got a nice blend of both here. Tell me about the power of that sort of peanut butter and jelly, if you will.
The academic foundation, one, helped me just do better research, ask more questions, not just tell people what happened, but why did this happen? why are taxis disappearing from the streets of every city? And go a little deeper. And that only, I was sitting in the conference room with him at NYU and using the whiteboard. It just forces you to dig a little deeper. So I think part of it is we're so hardwired today to see something, double click and send. Part of it is, one of the people we talked to in the book was Tom Friedman, the author from New York Times, and his last book is "Thank You for Being Late," which was a benefit of. He loves when people are late for meetings because it gives him 20 minutes of unstructured time to think. And I think ultimately, going back to your first question, part of the benefit of writing the book is that it takes you off the Ferris wheel of craziness to give you time to think in a world where more and more people are just doing and not enough people are saying. You ever wonder why?
Right. It's almost like you have to force yourself to carve out time to be thoughtful and introspective.
Yeah, you have to slow down and smell the roses, as they say, versus just, oh, I know why they. Because most of the answer, you get to the 80-20 rule pretty quick. Yeah. People, will quickly understand why Warby Parker was a success. But they won't realize that it's just not having, as having a good idea today
Yeah.
is table stakes. The winner is a person who has a good idea, executes it really well, and then gets a little lucky on the side.
Yeah, and the luck part never hurts. So as we start to wrap up here, any maybe one or two things that someone should be thinking about if they're in the midst of writing a book or their book's coming out to launch or sort of in this thought leadership space that they should absolutely not do, even though it's common, sort of quote common knowledge that you should, and then the inverse of that, things they should do that they may not be thinking of.
I'll start with the back end of that. The things that you should do is that, don't go to the likely suspects. If you want to do research, don't go to sometimes we found phenomenal stories in places we wouldn't ordinarily look for a business story. Central Park,
Hmm.
the Greenwich Library. So sometimes by finding the edge of the table and going off the target list, you learn more than if you had done, if I were writing a book on marketing and where you start with Procter and Gamble,
Yeah, yeah.
but sometimes you learn more by zooming out a bit.
Okay,
And so that's my
that's interesting.
first piece of advice is that, you want to write a book and the 5 things you want to do, but don't get too narrow too fast because most of the interesting stories were about pastrami, not paper towels. Oh, I found, and ordinarily you wouldn't go to that. So that's the main advice when writing a book is that
Okay,
you obviously need focus. You have a good title to get focus, but if you cut to the chase, you'll miss personal learning, and you also miss, because what is a book? A book is a great story that people want to share.
sure.
And in today's world, the only thing that matters is shareable content. Word of
In
mouth,
lots of
word of
forms.
eye.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. And no one shares ordinary, you
Right.
know. So you're going to need something a little, no one says I took a flight to LA and the plane got there on time. You're only going to share, I took a flight to LA and the pilot couldn't find LA and we landed somewhere else.
Yeah, right, right.
Or, I took a flight to LA and it took 72 hours. So, you got to find extraordinarily good things. And to do that, you need to, it's really hard to find stories that people want to share.
Excellent.
But ultimately, anything is driven by
Well,
that.
great
Just
advice.
don't just go to the likely suspects and just repeat uh, what's right in your target zone.
I love it. So therefore, we should not have another book out in a long time on Apple or Google or Uber, right?
Yeah,
And not that you
yeah,
can't learn from
exactly.
those companies, but go
Well,
one
yeah,
deeper.
people love it and they do well, but ultimately it's the same story.
Yeah,
You gotta click out a couple times.
great. Well, that's great stuff. Thank you so much for sharing your journey with us today, Alan. I appreciate it. Lots of interesting nuggets here that I think folks can unpack and internalize and take action against. So thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Pleasure doing it. Thanks, Peter.
To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.